when you talk about porn addiction, it sounds so simple at a surface level. Some people would even hear that and kind of scoff, like, "Ah, can you really be addicted to that stuff?" But the answer for starters is yes. Like the addiction research is all very clear that this is incredibly addictive. Some would argue it's as addictive as cocaine or heroin.
Satya, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Great to be here.
Absolutely. My first and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
Oh, I appreciate that, especially with the line of work that I'm in. I am, you know what? I'm like a 6 out of 10 right now for two reasons. Number one is it's January when we're recording this. So this is a really busy month for our business because we do addiction recovery. So lots of New Year's resolutions and that kind of thing. Being busy is good, but just there's a lot. So some days as a business owner, I feel like I'm being torn in 12 different directions, and I've had a lot of days of that lately. And then we're weaning our child off of his soother, which any parents listening know this can be a very big deal. And it has been for our little son. And so just have not slept the way I normally sleep. He's usually a good sleeper, but he's missing his soother and I'm a bit sleep deprived. So I'm about a 6 out of 10 today.
Mm. I didn't really like make the correlation between New Year's resolutions and addictions and the work you're doing. For some reason, my brain didn't go there. I'd like gym, fitness, but like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. New Year's resolutions, people want to change their life, fresh start. Do you find that people who make it sort of a New Year's resolution fall off more quickly, or how does that work in terms of their commitment level to what's going on?
It really depends on all the other pieces. I think the New Year, New Me thing can be like a little injection. And if that's sort of an injection into a system, some professional guidance, like, some effective recovery work, that little extra dose of motivation can actually go a really long way. I think for guys who are like, oh, I'm just going to enjoy the holidays and then I'll start all over again January 1st. Like, we all know how that goes. Like, it's like, oh, I'm in 20K debt. I'm going to put myself in 30K debt, and then January 1st comes and I'm going to try to get myself out of debt. And it's like, dude, you just made the debt worse. So I think when the new calendar is your only hope, you're screwed. It's not going to go very far. But if you got some other pieces in place, the New Year, New Me thing can be really effective. And I always tell my coaches, because our first program, or like your first leg with us is 4 months long. And I always tell coaches, like, hey, mark May on your calendars because you will have some remarkable stories. And there are some pretty cool turnarounds that we see in the first quarter of the year.
Yeah. Because I think about motivation when it comes to this, right? And like some people are always like, you only should be intrinsically motivated. And I'm like, there is a place for this like external motivation, right? Yeah. Like if your situation's like real fucked and the only thing that's going to get you off your ass is sort of like money or fame or, I want to date more chicks. Yeah, maybe like we're going to have to tweak that motivation as it goes to make it more virtue driven and things like that. But you need some activation energy to fire you the fuck up. And so I think it's okay at the beginning to have an external motivator. And then as you get more consistent, you're like, oh, this is like an actual habit. I'm in the program. I'm 4 months in. Okay, great. Now maybe it's time to tweak it where it's internally driven. And I still have some external rewards here and there, but it doesn't always have to be. I think if it's either one or the other, you're probably in a little bit of trouble. But I think a mixture of both and maybe a little bit more external motivation at the beginning, then of course it turns to internal because you're driven by, wanting to be your best or, I want to live by these virtues or whatever the case may be. At least I found that to be valuable.
Well, we had a guy who was married and his wife was ready to leave him over his addiction because it was getting really out of control. And so he came into the program and he's like, I know that my motivation should be bigger than just like a circumstance or dependent on another person. So he was feeling really bad because his main motivation was, I'm just trying to win my wife back. And we were like, dude, if this is what's motivating you right now, let's do it. Like, as long as your motivation's relatively healthy and ethical, then we'll roll with it. You know what I mean? Because it's what's motivating you right now. And we find exactly what you just said, which is that whatever that external motivator is, New Year, New Me, marriage is on the brink, or maybe you lost a job over it. Eventually, if you stay on course long enough, usually your motivations will start to refine themselves over time. And we've seen some more unfortunate sides of this where I actually just got this message from a client recently where He did the program. He was fighting for a marriage. I think he was actually engaged, so a marriage to be. And his fiance was feeling on the fence when she heard about some of his struggles. So he did the program, he got clean, and she ultimately still decided to not continue with the marriage. So he's pretty heartbroken, very grateful that he made those changes in his life. And now his motivation is different to stay free, right? He's doing it more for himself. He's doing it because he feels better, and he's doing it because he still wants to get married one day. It's just going to be to somebody else, and he wants to be in a good position to do that. But yeah, it goes without saying, like, whatever's motivating you, you probably need to ride that wave to start, and then you can make it better as time goes on.
Yeah, 100%. I well, I didn't know I was going to talk about that to start, but it was a good little opening
Yeah,
opening
really
convo. Where I wanted to start with you was with God, because I think it sounds like, from looking at your work and talking to you multiple times, that's sort of the foundation of where you build your work, your life, your marriage, and all these sorts of things. So, when did that become an important part of your life, and also how does it play into just the work that you're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, technically, the story starts when I was very young. I grew up in a pastor's home, and just faith was a huge part of what we did. I went to Christian school, and my addiction story starts here around the same time. I got exposed to pornography in the computer lab of my Christian school. Like I was the kid who just should not have fallen into this stuff, and yet I did, and lived with a lot of religious guilt and religious shame, and always, like, again, I knew all the stuff because I grew up in it, but truthfully, it wasn't until my 20s that I really started to think more seriously about faith. And the reason is because I was studying biological sciences. I was very brainy, skipped a grade, had my honors degree by the time I turned 20, and all, five figures in research grants. And I'm just surrounded by all these smart people in my research labs and faculties that don't believe in God. And I just couldn't reconcile the two. Like, the rubber had to meet the road, and either I was going to jump on board and say, yeah, I don't think I really believe in the God thing either, or I was going to, take hold of some derivative, or, the faith that I had grown up with. And that's where I ultimately felt like, I would say I found God, but I think it's more accurate to say God found me. And I think when God found me and I really felt like, okay, I know this is true in my heart, I committed my life to be a Christian, to make God the first and most important thing in my life. And that's when I actually decided, man, I got to quit this addiction too. I didn't know it was an addiction at the time. I just thought it was a bad habit that I would quit someday. And it was when I tried to quit that I realized I couldn't. And that's when I kind of realized I needed help. So on the front end, the whole spiritual aspect of my life is what brought this addiction to the forefront. I was sort of living in a blissful ignorance and a denial of my addiction and how severe it had become. On the back end, I would say the adage that I swear by more than anything else in the addiction world is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. I don't know if you've heard that statement before, but man, it's so true. We've witnessed it in our community and with all the clients that we've served over the years. And in my own life, very, very true. Not just connection with other people, but also connection to God is what really allowed my heart to find a peace and a freedom and a level of satisfaction where I was no longer tempted or giving in to the temptations towards pornography and some of the other vices that were in my life.
Mm, yeah. I mean, I feel like so many young boys now are having the sort of the similar story of you of finding it so early on.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's
and
different though, right?
yeah,
Because when I was 11, it wasn't smartphones, it was barely broadband internet, right? So like the level of access I had was different. I had to like sneak around into the family computer room to watch porn and that kind of thing. And I did a lot of that, but I feel it for the 11-year-old boys now because it's right at your fingertips. There's nothing stopping you from doing it, and the intensity of the content has changed quite a bit as well over the years. So it's a whole new ball game for them.
it is. Yeah, it's very frightening. You have like this sort of mixture of this easy access to porn. You have sort of online dating and like virtual robot girlfriends,
Yeah.
and you have also at the same time this like sort of attack on masculinity and healthy integrated masculine where you want to feminize men. You have all of these sort of, you know, conflation of things happening to sort of really hinder the growth and development of a young boy so he can become a productive, part of society where he's building things and adding to things. And it makes it very complicated because I'm around young boys all the time as a baseball coach, and you can see sort of some of the things that they're trying to work out. And I feel like it's much better in a baseball or sporting environment because you're around other dudes. There's still a little shit talking, but you're trying to get better, and there's a little competition aspect, and you have an aim. You have something you're working towards, like you talked about with addiction, right? You need something else to have your attention. I think Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about that, all the time. But anything you want to go off that, feel free.
Well, yeah, I think for young guys, the difficult thing is, in addition to just the higher likelihood that you will view pornography and that you'll have access to it. They say that porn is the 3 A's: affordable, accessible, and anonymous. So those things make it very easy to kind of latch onto. But I think the other thing that the younger generation is running into is a lack of real depth and meaningful connection, especially as they enter early adult years, college years, early career years. The sense of connectivity is a lot less. It's a lot lower because we become so digitized and virtual. And if we sort of translate, again, that same adage, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. If connection is the real solution here, then this generation has the two big giants to face, which the first being just the porn industry and the likelihood that you're going to get kind of wrapped up in it at some point at a young age when your brain's still developing. And then the second element, which is that you might have a higher tendency to be disconnected or not have meaningful connections in your life naturally that could actually, thwart some of those temptations and keep you out of those vices. So I think those are the two big things that this generation will need to figure out. And we're talking about it a lot legally. Like, we don't really work with people under 18 right now. And I don't think that we will. It's not our scope. We're the most effective with young professionals to midlife professionals, 25 to 45. And we're talking all the time about, the future generations. I'm thinking even of my own kids. What are the solutions they're going to need 20, 25 years from now? Because we got to be thinking about those things now, even though obviously there's some parts we can't predict with technology changing so fast. But it's a really necessary part of this conversation.
Yeah. Before we jump into that, I would like to go back a little bit and ask you, more personally, how you overcame what you found out was an addiction and sort of what were the steps you took. And then I guess that drove you into the work that you're doing now, but more personally.
Yeah, when you talk about porn addiction, it sounds so simple at a surface level. Some people would even hear that and kind of scoff, like, "Oh, can you really be addicted to that stuff?" But the answer for starters is yes. Like, the addiction research is all very clear that this is incredibly addictive. Some would argue it's as addictive as cocaine or heroin. I'm going somewhere with this to answer your question though. If the issue is you're watching stuff that you don't want to watch on a device, then surely the solution would just be put a blocker or something that stops you from watching the thing you don't want to watch on your device. And we can dust our hands off and say, problem solved. It's not really an addiction, right? And that would be true if porn was actually simply a behavioral issue. So the first 3 years that I was in recovery, so I make this commitment to live my life for God. I know that means not watching things like pornography and certainly not having vices and dependencies of any kind. Really, that would be in that realm of, unhealth or bad for you. So I'm trying to quit, and I'm installing internet filters. I'm praying more. I'm mustering up willpower. I'm occupying myself with busyness. I'm doing the things that logically make sense. And what I didn't realize is that's kind of the equivalent of running over a weed with a lawnmower. Everything looks clean temporarily, but as long as the root system is there, that weed is going to grow back one way or the other. And that was the case for me. Like, I would keep getting these streaks. I was all about my streak. Like, I hit 30 days and then I hit 3 months, and then, oh shoot, I had a relapse. We'll start all over again. Because the weed was just growing back. The root system was still there. So how did I actually break free? Well, I started to actually tackle the underlying roots. And I realized that if I could get to the roots, the more psychological elements of what was really causing my dependence on pornography, then as a natural byproduct, I would just start to watch pornography less. And that was kind of the theory that I had picked up in university along the way through some of my studies and some of the stuff that I was observing in the Bible when I was, getting into that a lot more. And it was sort of a theory I had, and it turned out to be true. And so it was still about another 2 years of kind of tackling the roots, figuring out why I watch pornography. That's a really important question to ask yourself. And then, Abraham Lincoln famously said, if I had 5 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And so in that 2 year stint, I probably spent about 18 months sharpening the axe. And I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but I was doing it. And then the last few months is where I really start to get breakthrough. And February 2016 is when I had my last relapse.
Hmm. And do you use the word like cured, recovered, in recovery? What sort of language do you use around
Yeah.
that? And is that important to you?
I appreciate the question. Very important to me. And I am maybe a little bit controversial, although I have enough clinical friends who will back me up on this now. But I believe in recovered, not in recovery. I don't believe once an addict, always an addict. I believe that your identity can totally shift. And in fact, I believe that if you think you're an addict, you will probably more likely to stay addicted. Because if that's what you believe about yourself, why would you behave any differently? So I believe in a finality and an absolute freedom where you can look in the rearview mirror and say, yeah, that was a former life. That was a former me. That was an old habit. And it's not a part of who I am anymore.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not super well versed, so I may get some heat, on the internet for this in the 12-step program. But I think a lot about identity. And when you say I am something, that resonates deeply. Like for a long time, I
Yeah.
said, I am a baseball player. I am a wrestler. I'm a podcaster. And those things are true, but there are many more things to my identity. And as you sort of progress in life and you experience more things, I've now come to think of identity as like repeated beingness. So who am I being on a consistent basis, which really means what values do I represent? Okay, hopefully like my goal is to be honest and resilient and consistent and hopeful. Like, okay, that's my identity. And now other
Yeah.
parts of that, I want to be that in as a podcaster or a friend or whatever the case may be. And so when I think about the 12 step and I am always identifying as this thing, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic. At some point you're not anymore because you're trying to do something different. And I get the 12 step program has worked for like millions of people and it's fucking incredible and awesome and great. And so I'm not putting any heat on it, but isn't there something to be said about how we shape our identity and who that represents in the world? I also think about it
Oh, dude. Yeah.
on your podcast. We talked about mental health a lot. If I always say I'm depressed, I'm depressed, I'm depressed, you're going to feel depressed. What if you say I'm experiencing depression or I'm having a season of depression? There are other different languages. Depression is totally real and you're going to feel it for sure, but you don't have to identify as the thing. You are not. You are a human being who's going through something probably challenging and really hard, or someone died in your, whatever the case may be. And so I think those things are important because we always want to put labels on something because it's easier for us to wrap our brains around. Okay, I am this thing. That's it. I'm done. Finished.
Yeah.
Work is over.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, so we work with a lot of professional men, like executives and athletes and business owners and accountants, engineers, doctors, that kind of deal. And one of the things that we find is this identity thing is a huge, huge issue that we need to usually tackle eventually. It's typically not right away. It's actually, we have a 3-pillar process, which is self-awareness, healing of the heart, and shifting your identity. This is literally pillar number 3 for us because it's so crucial. But let's go back to the I'm a baseball player example. The inherent issue with that as an identity is that if you are a baseball player as an identity, then your value is equated with how well you play baseball. And that can be really awesome when you're crushing it and everything you hit goes out of the park. But when you're in a slump and you're really not performing the way you want to, you're going to feel like crap about yourself. So what we're trying to get is some sort of sense of identity that is apart from our behavior, almost like it's within our control, but it's also beyond our control, as in we don't have to just kind of blow where the wind goes. And so what we encourage our clients to do is to really shift their identity from what they do to the relationships, the core relationships that they have. And again, I'm glad we prefaced this conversation with the spiritual part of it, because for me, that would be like being a son of God. That's an identity that does not change. God's not going to change his mind about me. And that relationship I have with God as, being a perfect father for me and me being a son of God, that literally will never change, which means my business could get shut down tomorrow. My wife could leave me. I'm still a son of God. It doesn't mean that I'm sure I will be tempted and really challenged in my real belief if those things were to happen on the same day. But you get what I mean. I have a plumb line that is there that's apart from my performance. And for guys, this is a really hard thing to embrace, but it's really where you truly understand what it means to have infinite worth or an unshakable kind of identity. So I think this part is really important. The other thing I was going to say in the 12-step conversation is there is a derivative for our industry. It's called SAA, Sexaholics Anonymous, and so this is for sex addicts, and people with porn addictions will do this program as well. We've had a lot of graduates of those programs come and do our program, and the main reason is because that program, the 12-step, allowed them to get sobriety. It didn't allow them to get freedom. So sobriety is, I don't engage in the thing anymore. I don't drink anymore. I don't watch porn anymore. And again, anybody who goes that far gets a huge round of applause from me. Like, this is hard work. But if you made it that far, like, dude, you're crushing it. Well done. However, that's what we would term sobriety, and we believe there is a next phase called freedom. Sobriety is, I'm one bad decision away from losing it all or starting all over again. That's where you kind of get the I'm in recovery, but I couldn't say I'm recovered because in theory I could always make a mistake and go back. That's sobriety kind of language. But if we talk about freedom, freedom is where things have changed at such a fundamental, innate level that you are not just sober where you're abstaining from the thing you don't want to do. You're walking in a completely new life. And I'll give you a great example. We had a client come to us. This is not that long ago. This guy, to use his words, he had an affair with on his wife, or he cheated on his wife every single opportunity he can get. And he was doing this for 5 decades. He was in his early 70s, addicted to pornography. I mean, mistresses, like there was not a list that could actually number all of them. It was so bad. He finally gets caught. And the day he gets caught, he stops. He stops everything cold turkey. And for 2 years, he is just white knuckling his way through. He had withdrawal symptoms and everything like that, just so that his wife would stay with him and so that his family wouldn't basically abandon him. And he came to us not because he was watching pornography, because for 2 years he was clean, but he was miserable. I mean, miserable. The marriage is hanging on by a thread. His kids don't really trust him. He stopped doing the thing, but he's not a changed person. He has sobriety. He doesn't have freedom. So after 6 months with us, all of a sudden we're getting messages and comments from his wife, his mother, and get this, his mother-in-law, that's saying like, man, there's something different about you. And you're a married man. Like if your mother-in-law is saying something like that about you, you're probably doing something right. And so this guy he was finding it, because he was getting to the deeper parts of what was actually causing this addiction in the first place. And he's experiencing not just sobriety, but legitimate freedom as a result.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because you hear a lot about people who are trying to get sober. Obviously, they have to change like the places they go, the friends they have, because that's all,
definitely.
And then at some point, you want to be able to, if you're, alcoholic, you want to be able to go to a friend's house party where other people are drinking beer, right? You can't totally avoid that for the rest of your life. I mean, I guess you can, technically you can, but like, alcohol is sort of the most used and accessible drug in America, which is, another thing is very bad.
Other than Instagram.
Yeah. And so you want to be able to have that freedom to like, hang out and go out and, have to go to like ragers or parties or be in like, that's not really cool anyways, but like just to go to like a barbecue potentially like that has a couple beers out and like, that's the freedom you're talking about. And
that's freedom. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me in terms of like making that disparity.
And that is the measurement of freedom. I had this experience about 2 years into my recovery. 2 years into freedom. So my last relapse was February 2016. It was not 2 years. It was probably 4 years. It was 2020. It was during the pandemic. My wife and I had just bought a home, and I had gotten kind of used to this area. There's a park nearby that I really liked walking in. And this park, there was like this random homeless encampment kind of on the edge of it. It's like a forested area. It's not like your typical park. It's like a lot of trees and ponds and that sort of thing. So there's this homeless encampment, and I just thought that was weird. And I kind of went to check it out. And, there's like magazines and there's like there's like a Discman. I hadn't seen a Discman in like 25 years. There's like a Discman. It was kind of weird. And then there's this stack of porn magazines. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what, like so random, So I just start walking away. And then I thought to myself, okay, this is a park. Like this is a public area. There's kids here. I could actually take those magazines and throw them out. and maybe prevent somebody else from having their first exposure that led them down the same path I had. So kind of in this, like, like the devil's on one shoulder, it's like, you can do it, go grab the porn, and the other one's like, maybe you should avoid it. It's probably not the best thing to do. And what I'm trying to do is just evaluate, like, do I actually have capacity for this? And my ultimate conclusion was, I think I do, and I'm gonna go throughout those porn magazines. So I go and I scoop them up. And sure, like, of course, as fate has it, like, the nearest garbage can is like a 3-minute walk away. It's like way on the other side. I couldn't find anything nearby. So I start walking to the garbage can, and I can, like, feel, like, the buzz in my nervous system, like, just very aware of what's there, and very aware of, like, all it takes is like one little peek. Like, what's in my head is like, oh, one little peek, it wouldn't hurt. And meanwhile, I have to remind myself, like, no, like, years of freedom, like, keep the momentum going, whatever. So I make it to the garbage can, I throw them out, kind of breathe a sigh of relief. And I realized that is the mark of freedom. It is being able to look at your temptress in the face and still say no. And it takes time to get there. You can't quit cold turkey and all of a sudden have that relationship with whatever it is, alcohol or pornography or, whatever. But I think you can get to that place. And I think that's real freedom.
Yeah, that's extremely powerful. And then just to briefly touch on that first pillar you talked about of recovery, of self-awareness, people talk about that a lot, but what does that look like in terms of, the work that you do?
So there's two things for us. The first is defining thoughts, which is a lot easier for guys to do. But the second thing is being able to label emotions. And it's amazing how emotional porn viewership is. We kind of reduced this to like raw physical, sexual nature of guys. This is just a guy thing. This is what we do. About 35% of all porn viewers online are now women. So that alone should tell you, like, this is not just about raw masculine sexuality here. Like, there's more going on that meets the eye. And a lot of the guys that we work with are emotionally numb. Like they have no idea what's going on within. They've blocked them, they've ignored them, they've suppressed them. They have no emotional acuity. And it's usually costing them their sobriety and eventually their freedom. Because if you're not aware, you can't repair what's really going on underneath the surface. So when we talk about building self-awareness, we're talking about really understanding the thoughts and the emotions that are surrounding your consumption of pornography. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a corporate executive, really high stress job. And when he's stressed, he tends to feel inadequate. He feels like, I can't keep up with people's expectations of me. Okay, this is like almost verbatim, like all the corporate executives that have ever been through our program, right? There's some affiliation with like, oh, people's expectations of me. I don't want to disappoint people. And if I disappoint people, I feel like a failure. And if I, it's all these kinds of things that are clouded. But if we just isolate like the I feel overwhelmed. So if you don't have that awareness of overwhelm, this is me being overwhelmed. And when I'm overwhelmed, I have a tendency to watch pornography. If you don't have the understanding of the emotions that lead to the viewership, then what happens is most people's recovery solutions are, oh God, I pray that I don't give in to my temptation this time. Or when I'm really tempted, I just gotta, be busy or find something else that takes my mind off it. And that's incredibly reactive. It's you don't get a chance to really prep or have well like thought out plans or strategies. So the idea of self-awareness is trying to nip things in the bud. We're trying to get upstream so that when you do feel overwhelmed, number one, just be able to label it. That's a huge step for a lot of guys. But then number two, what are some better alternatives you can do that aren't going to lead you down that path? And if guys can really understand this whole self-awareness concept, it's amazing. It doesn't necessarily fix all your problems, but it puts you back in control of the situation. Because addiction ultimately is I lack control, right? I have the urge, I have the desire, I have a temptation, and I'm not able to control myself the way I want to. Self-awareness puts control back on the table, and it gives you a chance to at least influence the outcome. You still have to do the other pillars, but this is kind of where everything starts.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an important point though to note that like most guys are not watching porn because they're like these like sexually animalistic. They just watch and masturbate for 10 hours a day. Most of the time they just are watching the thing and nothing's happening. Because again, it's a way to cope with something they don't know how to cope with. I'm lonely. I'm distressed. I'm overwhelmed. My relationship is not good with my wife. Like I don't know what else to do. with anything. And so I'm just going to watch porn because at least I get to see some hot chicks or whatever, even though at that point it's like not even part of that. It's not even the point. It's like just to do something else besides, voluntarily face these feelings that I might be feeling. And then that's a larger discussion about how we've sort of been taught as men to feel our feelings or just push them away or not talk about them or whatever the case may be. And I'm sure that also has to play into the work you're doing when trying to get these guys out of the sort of the rut that they're in.
Yeah, we have the saying in our community that he who is most vulnerable heals the quickest. And so, getting aware of those emotions and being able to discuss them is really, really important. Talking about them, yes, but talking about them is a means to an end. The goal is that you allow that emotion to process, to reach a resolve, so that you can move on with your day and carry on. Like, it's not about getting caught up in your emotions too much. It's just acknowledging them for what they are, giving them the attention that they deserve, and then carrying on with the things that are more important to you in your life. And when you can do that, two things happen. Number one is you become more aware of what's going on, so you have more control, and so you're ultimately going to position yourself for better decisions, kind of what we talked about before. But the second thing that happens, and we see this especially when guys are married, but it's true in single guys as well, is your relationship quality skyrockets. Because the number one complaint that guys get from women is that they don't open up on an emotional level, right? There's no emotional connection. I ask you how you're doing, and you just tell me what you did. You're not telling me how you're feeling or how that thing affected you, right? And that's what girls want. That's what women want. That's how they feel connected. Is they hear the emotional part of it. And so we have guys who they were in sexless marriages. Their wife didn't trust them. There was basically no connection. It was roommate syndrome. And just by them going through the first pillar of building self-awareness and learning to understand what's going on inside and also being able to articulate it to another person legibly so they understand what's going on and they can relate and connect on a deeper level, that alone has fixed a lot of those issues maritally. I don't want to oversell this thing. Like, there's still work to be done, but it allows that deeper connection to start to be forged in, typically what's the most important relationship to another person. And again, if the opposite of addiction is connection, it's not sobriety, then building that kind of connection is really, really critical, especially long term, not just to get free, but to stay free.
Do you think that's actually what women want?
Do I think the emotional connection?
Because there's like a bit of both and here, I think, right? Because like a guy who just like talks about his feelings all day, every day, nonstop, and is like sort of like run by them is not attractive to a female. It's
Agreed.
just not.
Yeah.
But there has to be that first step of understanding, like, I'm a dude, I do have emotions. And as a man, we do feel emotions very strongly. Like, I feel overwhelmed and frustrated and angry. And when I'm fucking happy or I feel them. And knowing that they're actually there and that I could talk about them or express them or have a protocol to release them is important. But then I think it's about discernment, at least with your partner. She does want to know how you feel. But I don't know what I'm not saying much here, but whatever you think about that, go for it.
So well, yeah, I think you're trying to qualify the statement I made earlier, which is, like what do all women want? And the reason I would say that most women want this in a marriage is this is the thing they want because it's the thing they don't have, right? Like, guys have no issue trying to initiate physical connection, trying to do things for the home, like being present, fixing things, and being a problem solver. The area where men seem to lack the most is in the emotional area, and that's why I'm emphasizing it. But it is not the only thing. I totally agree with you. I think it's just typically the missing ingredient to a really healthy relationship for most marriages.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think about because, like, healthy masculinity is like the warrior poet. At least that's how I look at it. But most of the time, you need the poet side more than you need the warrior side.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to come to terms with. And I had to think about that a lot, like writing my vows for my wedding. Okay, how do I actually express myself? Like, really on a sheet of paper, then to my wife. And like doing this podcast has helped a lot because you speak with amazing people. You got to be able to verbalize your ideas. And I've had to talk about my story a lot with my sister, as I shared with you. And you have to figure out what those feelings are. And so I think that's also important. And that's about building connections and relationships like you're talking about. But that poet side is really how you build sort of anything, then yeah, it comes to life where you got to be a warrior, whatever warrior might mean, protecting your family, getting things done, getting a job, providing, whatever the case may be. I don't think we have to go to war. Some people are, and thank God for them. But the poet side is really what we have to sort of integrate into being, healthy masculinity.
Yeah, I think society does a good job developing the warrior in most men, or at least giving us permission to express that part of ourselves. I think it's the poet side that sometimes gets neglected, or just doesn't get enough attention. It doesn't get developed the way it needs to. So that's why we're typically, that's what we're helping men improve on. We do have some men though who are the inverse of that. So the emotional part of it they get, they're very aware of their emotions, and now they're kind of wrapped up in it, they're living in it, and like you said, it's making them a little bit softer, a bit weaker. And so obviously those guys, it's about building the warrior within, building some, a bit of a backbone, building some resilience, setting some goals, just all those other things that may become a bit more naturally to most guys. There's that side of it too. And look, everyone's got their own thing. Like some of the clients I'm thinking of that fit in this category, just they had 3 older sisters. So, this was their upbringing, a lot of feminine energy, a lot of kind of female patterns that they picked up along the way. And they just need some role models and need some community to kind of show them the masculine side of it.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about all the time about how you can have assertiveness training. Everyone needs to be more assertive. Because I think we all lack in expressing what we need and what we want, because we feel like, what if someone rejects me? What if it's not the right thing? What if they say no? Okay, so I just not say anything and I'll just push it away, and hopefully they'll read my mind and everything will be cool. But being able to express what you need and you want is hard. It's hard for anyone, even someone deemed as a strong masculine man. It's it's hard. I don't know how I'm going to be received one way or the other. So always being able to assert yourself in that way, in a healthy, loving, obviously compassionate sort of way, is important training for anyone.
Yeah, and at the time that we're recording this, I was just talking about this on my podcast. I just interviewed a guy named Ryan Mickler from Order of Man, and we were talking a little bit about how the conversation around masculinity feels like it's changing again. The last few years, it sucked to be a guy, and being guys was terrible, and we should have been ashamed of our masculinity and all that. And now all of a sudden it feels like it's shifting again. And I have to imagine that's partially due to maybe some of the election outcomes and that sort of thing. But even on Netflix, dude, my Netflix is filled with all these movies now that are purporting more conservative values and very pro men and masculinity. And Gladiator 2 just came out, after a 20-year hiatus. And so it's an interesting time. And I think we'll see this conversation balance a little bit more in kind of the masculinity range. I'm really hoping so. Because I think guys have been getting mixed messaging around some of this stuff the last couple of years.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of that, how does fatherlessness, play a part in young boys, young men, diving into porn and that sort of becoming part of their identity?
So it's the identity thing. So exactly what we talked about earlier. If you get lost in your identity, or your identity is attached to what you do, which is very, very symptomatic of people who have fatherlessness, then addictions can become a lot more likely to develop because you don't have an anchor point. It's interesting, I'm a new father, and one of the things that was taught to me just getting ready to become a parent is when you are a father, you are the template that your daughters will marry, and you're the template that your sons will copy. And so when you are fatherless, you don't have that template to copy. And typically we replace that with other templates that, might be good if we're fortunate, but in most cases are not. And so I think that again, if you look at all the people that are fatherless, didn't have a father present growing up, they are more likely to commit crimes, poor academic performance, lower socioeconomic status, and higher addiction tendencies. And with our group, I would say it's no different. Our second pillar is healing of the heart, helping guys really recover from trauma, wounds of the past, limiting beliefs is kind of in there, wrapped into it a little bit. And I would say this is where addressing the parent relationships, the dynamics with your parents and whether they were there or not. This is the central part of the recovery journey. It's very, very important.
And how do we, make more of an emphasis on sort of the nuclear family or, that traditional household? Is that something that's important to you and pushing that forward or talking about that more? Oh,
goodness, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I believe if you change the man, you change the world. That's sort of my tagline that I'll shout from the mountaintops. But at the core of it, underneath it, I really believe that the backbone of society is the family unit. A mother, father, and kids. Like I just believe that that's God's design for the world. And I think when society has been at its best and when it's its most productive and its most healthy, I think that's generally the backbone. So I'm a big believer in the nuclear family. And I think, how do we get back there? What does it look like? I don't know that I have a full answer to that. I just know that for me personally, I have decided I'm just going to model what I think is best. And that's what we're trying to do with the work we do with DeepClean. That's the name of my program and my company. Is we're just trying to create a movement of guys who are going to take their wives seriously, take their kids seriously, and being a father to them, and really make it their life's mission to make a difference in this world for the better. And I think if enough people model it, we get enough momentum that way. I think we could at least be part of hopefully what's another wave of people that really start to prioritize and emphasize the traditional family unit again. Because I think without it, society is a lot more, it's kind of like a house of cards at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a domino effect of the right role models acting in a way that is the best for society. Because if you have a traditional, healthy, integrated masculine man, they are interested in protecting women and children and building civilization for the better. When you see fraud masculinity, like Andrew Tate, for example, they cosplay as like a WWE heel, sort of pretending that they're doing these things, but behind the scenes they're destroying everything. They're doing the opposite of what they think is good. They're not protecting women and children. They're destroying what civilization is while trying to cosplay as some sort of fucking caricature of masculinity, and it's horse shit. And when you have someone who's extremely charismatic doing that, like he's very charismatic, looks good, got cars, fancy women, cigars, big houses. I understand the appeal, but you have to actually listen to the words he's saying, and you could just tell that the words and the actions don't line up. There's no through line. There's no consistency. There's no values. There's no virtue. There's no addition to society. There's no trying to build things up. And so if young men can be attracted to real stuff that's like actually integrated and healthy, and someone who builds society and adds value and takes care of the things that are important. Like you said, there's just no way that the world doesn't become a better place.
No, 100%. Yeah, dude, the Tate thing was so devastating for me because I'm going to guess you had a similar journey. Like, you hear his message at first and you're like, okay, a little rough around the edges, but he says some things I really agree with. I think generally this is a good thing. And then, like, you get more of it and you're like, he's a little bit of a prick, but like, generally it's like good values for masculinity. And then you hear about all the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes and, like just his complete disregard for really, I would say, the value of people in general, but especially women, taking advantage of a lot of the guys in his own following. He's like exposing through this ring that's going on behind closed doors. And I was so bummed out because I just felt like he like, to me, there's a couple people like he and Dr. Jordan Peterson, who you've referenced, and some people that I think were championing a really good message. And I'm still a big Peterson fan. I don't think there's anything insidious going on behind closed doors with him, as far as I know. He's solid, and I think we need more people like that who are just trumpeting the messages of traditional masculinity and traditional family units. And I was really hopeless about it a couple of years ago. I kind of felt like, man, I think I might just be the only person like shouting on my mountaintop all by myself. But it's cool to see that like there's, I think, a bit of a pendulum swing going on, because I think guys especially need it. We need permission just to be men, like it's crazy that there was this whole toxic masculinity move. Like, to me, that's like an oxymoron. Like, if something is masculine, it's going to be healthy. I think I've heard you say that before as well. I think maybe not. Maybe I'm getting you mixed up. I forget. But I think it's like, yeah, like this whole message has just gotten so convoluted, and it's so unnecessary. If guys can just be guys and do their thing, the world becomes a better place.
Yeah. I mean, masculinity can't be inherently toxic. That just like doesn't make sense. Masculinity is like anything else in the whole world. There's a vice of excess and there's vice of virtue. You can think of masculinity as a hammer, right? If me and you are in our masculine, we're healthy, we're using a hammer to build houses and homes and create things. If I'm on the other side of it, a evil person, then I'm using a hammer to beat the shit out of someone. The hammer itself is not toxic. The hammer itself is just the tool. And that's the same with masculinity. And you have the same with femininity as well. You can see the toxic femininity play out in the culture over and over and over and over again. I mean, these
Yeah.
women, the way they are vicious with each other behind their back is like, crazy. At least if I'm going to have a confrontation with you, I'm saying it to your face, and hopefully that we get it figured out and we move on. I'm not trying to literally ruin your life behind closed doors, like sort of this toxic femininity is. And so it's just
Yeah.
how you display it and how you use it. It can't itself be toxic, because then if I'm a 7-year-old boy and I'm already toxic, well, I haven't fucking done anything yet, man. I'm just trying to like figure out how to like, color in this book, and I'm figuring out how to, tie my shoes properly and make sure I, close the seat after I go to the bathroom or whatever, like normal stuff. You know what I mean? I'm not toxic. Like, and
Yeah.
that can't be the messaging, or else it's just so we've ruined it.
No, yeah, I totally agree, man. And I think that's the thing, right? Is you and I, we didn't grow up with this messaging. Like we at least have enough of a foundation to go back on. But I do think of like this next generation, like that's where those are the people whose minds we really need to make sure we're getting the actual truth to, because otherwise that foundation or that baseline, that thing you compare everything else to, is totally skewed. So I'm glad things are shifting now. I think in a couple years it'll be even better. But yeah, I think we're going in the right direction again. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, speaking about it, what do you want your son to take away maybe from your work, or understand about porn, or understand about sort of sexual relationships? I assume at some point you'll have the chat with him. But what do you want him to come away with thinking about, what porn is, and maybe if he stumbles upon it for the first time and you're not there, how do you want him to react, or if you want him to tell you or not, or anything like that?
So I actually don't believe in the talk. I'm not a fan of the concept. I believe it is not a one-off conversation. It's an ongoing discussion. And the discussion just takes on different forms depending on the age. So my kid is 15 months old. He knows where his penis is. If I say, where's your penis? He'll point to it right away. I'm trying to get him comfortable with that kind of stuff right now. And what I'm thinking about as a young father is, how do I have conversations that are, again, age appropriate, but early and often with him, so that he understands my one goal, the message I'm trying to get across to him. Number one is it's okay to talk about this stuff. But number two, it's okay to talk to dad about this stuff, which means I can't be the guy who's like, I can't like get all weird and bunched up when I'm having the conversation with him about sex, or it's probably going to come up earlier than I want it to. I have to just show him we can have cool, or not cool, but like regular conversations about sexuality and everything related to it. And it's not a big deal. Nobody's getting in trouble. Dad's not changing his voice and talking funny. This is just, we're talking about this like anything else. What my goal is to create a baseline or a foundation, so that when he has his own device, I can say, hey, now that you have your own device and now that you're going to be online without my supervision or me watching, you might find this thing online called pornography. Here's what pornography is. If you ever find any of it, just let me know. You're not going to be in trouble. And he's actually going to believe me, because we've already had conversations where he wasn't in trouble for bringing something up or for talking about it. I think what a lot of parents do, and again, what I just explained to you is me asking this question to parents that have gone ahead of me and have done it well, or parents that have even made mistakes. So it's a little bit of an ideal that, in another 4 or 5 years, I can tell you how well I did on it. But the thing that I'm trying to avoid is, we've never talked about it before, and then when we do talk about it, like, it's too late because they've already been exposed. They're already talking to their buddies about it. They have their other sources where they're getting their information. Or number two is that we try to talk about it. It's such a bad experience for the kid that the next time he has another question, or he wants to learn more, or he gets exposed to something, he's not going to come to me because it doesn't feel safe. So those are the main things that I'm thinking about right now, is just how do I start to kind of create a foundation and, like, I guess enough like relational equity around these sort of subject matters, so that when we have more serious conversations, there's something there to build off of. And I think the more specific part, like my story, I have like over 100K followers on Instagram that all know that I had a porn addiction for 15 years, and they know all the ins and outs of it, right? And that part, obviously, I can't hide. I'm not going to try to hide. What I actually like about that part being so public facing is, hopefully it shows my kid that even though I'm going to have some standards, I'm going to have some ideals, hey, even dad falls short. And in the areas where dad really fell short and royally screwed up in this area, something really good came out of it. So here's the standards, and here's what's going to be best for you. Nobody's perfect. And even if you do fall short, something really good can still come out of it. So the pressure's off. Do your best.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's beautiful and very powerful. Um, Before we move on to sort of the last topic of conversation, is there anything else you want to mention, maybe about your work, about guys, pornography, addiction, recovery that we might have missed that seems important?
Yeah, so to the dads that are listening and you're thinking about your own kid and wanting your kids to stay safe online, obviously, not fall into these kinds of traps and vices. There's two things. Number one is I think having those conversations is very important. Conversations where you're warning against the dangers. You're obviously, you can share a little bit about your personal experiences as well. But I will say, I don't think anything is more powerful than a really healthy role model as a father. So if you are a dad and you're struggling, I think one of the best gifts you can give your kids is the example of freedom from pornography. So we see that dads can be really good clients in our program just because that motivation to do it for their kids or to do it for their wife, it can be really, really high. And like we were talking about at the beginning, that can really drive you, like a motivation for your kids, man, that can drive you to do some really powerful things. And so you can really have that working in your favor if you're a father. And I think I would just say, yeah, you guys, your audience is welcome to check our stuff out. The podcast is called The Man Within. I had you on there. We had a really good conversation about mental health. And we even talked a little bit about kids and parenting and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, check out our resources and see if what we have is aligned with you. And if it is, then you could take some next steps with us. But the show is called The Man Within, and the Instagram, we're really active over there. And I think for fathers especially, we'd love to have those conversations.
Amazing. Yeah. Great. Absolutely. Everyone should check it out. It's fantastic. All right. Last topic, a little bit more culturally relevant. The topic of OnlyFans. I want to start with asking you about, I don't know if you've seen, the headlines about this woman named Sophie Rain who claims to be a Christian virgin who made $43 million. I'm not so concerned about how much money she made. That's whatever. But the sort of the Christian virgin part, I think, is the most interesting part, while also she's sort of selling her body online. And as a man of faith, what are your initial thoughts on that?
Not a fan of it. I think for starters, like the okay, if you're going to be a Christian and Christian's part of your brand, I get that. It's important to me. Like I talk about my faith very openly, and we work with a lot of men who are faith based. So I think that layer, okay, I get it. Second layer, I'm a virgin. Again, if that's part of your brand, why are you saying that even as part of your brand just to begin with? So I know of some people online that talk about saving themselves for marriage, and their whole goal online is trying to have conversations about healthy dating, how to get ready for marriage. So in that context, it kind of makes sense, right? Like the context explains why you might share that you have not made that decision personally yet to be sexually intimate with another person. When the context is an account online where you show parts of yourself and get paid to do it, that context just doesn't add up to me. Like you're clearly sharing that for the wrong reasons. And I think to obviously go to the last layer, which is just being an OnlyFans model. From a Christian perspective, which I know is what you asked for, like I think we are called to really take care of our bodies and to steward them in a way that's healthy. And the word biblically it's sexual morality, which the Bible would define as sexual experiences between a husband and a wife in the context of a committed relationship. And so I think when you are facilitating, fostering, or in any way encouraging sexual experiences that are outside of a marriage, you are more or less going against the precepts and the standards of the Bible. So to me, nothing about it really adds up. I'm not a fan.
Yeah. And then, speaking on, they're the women, they feel some feminists, modern feminists believe like this is women empowerment. I think it's the opposite of empowering women. I think it's destroyed that. It's over sexualized. It's objectifying them in ways that are unimaginable. But you also have, guys showing up to either, have sex with these women like this girl, Lily Phillips, who had sex with 100 people in one day, or, they're subscribing. So what would you say? It's probably a lot of relationship to what you said about the emotional stuff you said about earlier in the conversation, but what would you say to some of these guys that are showing up to these things, and maybe how can we help them, encourage them to have a better path?
Well, I would just say that before we talk about having a better path, let's just talk about where this path ends. Like if you stay down the path of OnlyFans, basically paying for sexual content, you are programming yourself to have sexual experiences that are purely transactional. And that is the message when something is free. but the message is a lot louder when you're paying for it. And so if you're willing to put your hard-earned money to get sexual experiences, you have basically shot yourself in the foot at having any kind of healthy actual human experiences, romantically or otherwise. And a lot of the guys we work with, they unfortunately reach the deeper parts of this path where they are miserable. Some guys are borderline suicidal. It's cost them their marriage, it's cost them their jobs. So many guys that are losing their jobs for watching pornography at work, on work laptops, all that kind of stuff. So I think for starters, you have to understand where this path ends before we can maybe talk about a better path. There's no story of somebody who's like, yeah, I stayed on OnlyFans, I kept spending more money, and it was the best decision I ever made. Like we're just not hearing those stories because they don't exist, right? Somewhere along this way, this goes really far south, and you're trying to get yourself out of the 30K debt example that we talked about earlier. I think the better path, Jordan Peterson said it best. We've shouted him out so many times, we might as well do it one more time this episode. He said the reason that people quit an addiction, or the reason that people would even quit a bad behavior, is because they find something better to do. And that's one of the things I love about your show, man, is like, I think you're giving people a place to find more meaning in their life, to get a vision for their life, to get some purpose, to find just something that gives people a reason to get up in the morning. And I think when people have that purpose, when they have a sense that their life is valuable, they're making a difference in the world, I just think your proclivity towards things like OnlyFans becomes a lot less. And so that would be my big encouragement for somebody who's trying to get off that path onto something better. Find purpose, find something bigger than yourself, find a cause that you can rally behind, that you're actually passionate about. And I think that's a really good step to kind of get in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, it really all comes down to our self-worth. Because I talked to someone who used to work at an OnlyFans agency, and she would talk to these girls as to why they're doing this is because they see their only value in life as their body.
Yeah.
And that's
How's
heartbreaking.
that for women's empowerment?
Right, exactly. And that's absolutely not true. Like,
Yeah.
the three most important people that have ever been in my life, my wife, my mom, and my sister, are all women. And they are the most valuable. They bring the most value to my life in sort of advice and care and support and love and believe. Like, that's the stuff we have to. So if we can actually empower women to be like, your value is beyond this. It's so, you matter so much. The same can be said about the men in the world. Like you matter so much. And that phrase gets thrown around a lot in the mental health world. But it's like, if you actually think about it, like, there is no other you. You're the only you ever. So you matter so damn much that it's like actually kind of hard to comprehend how much you matter and how much you impact the world on just your basic day-to-day decisions and how much domino and ripple effect that has. And we can actually, express this to people in a way like that's actually caring, rather than just saying like, if I'm not doing any harm, or I just want to, be whatever the fuck that, it's dumb, right? There's important responsibility that we have to shoulder in life. And that's what makes life better, that you take on responsibility and you take on the sort of the moral obligation of being the best person you could possibly be in this world. And it starts with the conversations we have and how we talk about people and all these sorts of things. I think my face even just got a little bit red there. So I was kind of getting fired up about that. But anyways.
Yeah, well, the big lie of all this stuff, like OnlyFans and pornography, the big lie is that it's all about you, right? Like it makes you such a selfish, self-focused person because all you're thinking about is your needs, your pleasure, your reward, what you can get out of it. That's why people who watch pornography are terrible lovers, like because they don't care about the other person. They're just trying to think about how they can kind of get their own fill. And so I think what you just said is spot on. And I think it is completely counter to the messages that you're going to get from explicit content online, regardless of what that looks like, because that stuff's all trying to make it about you, and it's trying to make you very focused on yourself. And there's no actual long-term fulfillment there. If you really want to live a life of meaning and really make a difference in this world and become the person that God made you to be, it's going to be outside of those things. It's going to be finding something that's bigger than yourself and living a life that prioritizes and values other people around you as much, if not more, than you value yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for this conversation, for the work you do, who you are as a person, what you bring to the world. Any final thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, anecdotes, funny stories?
You know what, man? I appreciate you. Like, thanks for what you're doing. This is such a good platform, and I think we didn't even really talk much about suicide, but like, to me, your whole story is so impactful, having lost a bunch of friends to suicide myself. And yeah, I'm just cheering you on. And I want to really encourage people. I'm a big podcast listener myself. And the one thing that I can fall into as a listener is you just listen to the content. And once this episode's over, you're going to go on to the next thing. And the one thing I'd love to encourage your listeners to do just before this episode ends or before you go to the next thing is just think about like what was one major takeaway, and what's one major action point, or what's a change that you can make based on the content you heard today. And maybe that's just sharing it with somebody that you think would benefit from it. Maybe it means you go check some of the resources we referenced. There's no right or wrong, but I encourage you, just put what you just learned into work a little bit, and your life will change very rapidly.
Brilliant. Yeah, got to be action, action, action. That's it for sure. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. See you guys next time. Cheers. Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.